With a busy schedule today and so much information to give, I decided to put these in comments and give a brief summary of today's events. I had time to explore the hotel a little bit before our boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. The sea was calm, but the clouds at times were very ominous. We next took a short walk to the boat museum and marveled at the old boat that was found recently. Bus to Capharnaum, we walked and learned this is a fishing town with 7 springs that the fish liked, and was a bustling town in its day with a synagogue that Jesus most likely preached at. Also, we had a mass in the church that is over the house of St. Peter. Going to lunch, some of us experienced the whole St. Peter fish before going to Tabgha and going to the Church of the Multiplication and walking a little farther to St. Peter's Church on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. The ride to the Beatitudes was on a zig-zagged road, but was an amazing walk with great views of the valley and a beautiful church. The rain entertained us during the day to make realism to the passages that were said throughout the day.
I tell of his great word. Blessed be the Lord of my life. His love shall endure. Lift up your hearts to the Lord in praise of his mercy. Sing out your joy to the Lord. His love is enduring. Lift up your hearts to the Lord in praise of his mercy. Sing out your joy to the Lord. His love is enduring.
Mary Magdalene was from the town of Magdala. One of the things that he told Mary Magdalene, go and tell my disciples that I'm going to meet them where? In Galilee. Because he wanted to come back to Galilee. He loved Galilee so much. But this is not the only reason, by the way. I mean, he knew very well that his death in Jerusalem will be the end of the story for all the disciples. And it was the end of the story for all the disciples. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what's next. They were afraid from the Romans and the Jews. They couldn't stay in Jerusalem. And so for them, the best thing to do was to leave Jerusalem and come back to Galilee and to go back to their normal jobs as if nothing had happened. And this is what happened. And that's why Jesus had to appear to them over and over after his resurrection to tell them that this is not the end of the story. This is just the beginning. Gadarenes, or Gadara, it was part of the Decapolis, the 10 Roman cities. And the Jews couldn't go to that area. You know that the Jews couldn't go to places where the non-Jews lived, as well as Samaria, for example. They couldn't go through Samaria or walk in Samaria because of the Samaritans. So we know from the Gospels that Jesus used to take his disciples and go to places where the rest of the Jews couldn't go to. One of the miracles of Jesus actually took place on the other side of the lake. Which one was that? Maybe when we get closer, I'm going to point it out to you. So we have the Mount of Beatitudes, we have the Church of Multiplications, we have the Primus of St. Peter, we have Capernaum, we have Bethsaida, we have Chorazin, we have all those places where Jesus spent most of his time.
Don't blow it.
Okay, all set.
Lunch or no?
I just want to know if he does, who's cleaning
They
it.
do it more than once.
157 fish.
Okay, who ordered the fish?
We want it fresh too. We caught nothing.
No kitchen duty today.
Lord God, heavenly King, Almighty God and Father, we worship you, we give you thanks, we praise you for your Lord Jesus Christ, only Son of the Father, Lord God, Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Have mercy upon
You shall cross the barren desert, but you shall not die of thirst. You shall wander far in safety, though you do not know the way. You shall speak your words to foreign men, and they will understand. You shall see the face of God and live. Be not afraid. I go before you always. Come, follow me, and I will give you rest. If you pass through raging waters in the sea, you shall not drown. If you walk amid the burning flames, you shall not be harmed. If you stand before the power of hell, and death is at your side, know that I am with you through it all. Be not afraid. I go before you always. Come, follow me, and I will give you rest. And blessed are your poor, for the kingdom shall be theirs. Blessed are you that weep and mourn, for one day you shall laugh. And if wicked men insult and hate you all because of me, blessed are you. Be not afraid. I go before you always. Come, follow me, and I will give you rest. Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord
forsake her child, he will not abandon you. Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord will stand as a shelter for all who will call on his name, sing the praise and the glory of God. Should you turn and forsake him, he will gently call your name. Should you wander away from him, he will always take you back. Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord will stand as a shelter for all who will call on his name, sing the praise and the glory of God. As he swore to your fathers when the flood destroyed the land, he will never forsake you. He will swear to you again. Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord.
I listen to Peter in front of the whole group knew something was going on here, right? He did this with the other disciples to bring back that authority to Peter for the whole group, to reestablish it. Because Peter was crying. He had separated himself. He had denied the Lord. Yet Jesus here is bringing him back into community, and that's, I think, why confession is it's not only just this solo thing between me and God, but it's also being welcoming and bringing everyone back into the community after we've separated ourselves from the community. And I think that's what Jesus is doing with Peter today, bringing him back to the community, saying, "You are still my rock, even though you are a simple man like all of us. I can still build my church." I think that's what's so beautiful about this discussion between Peter and Jesus this morning. Then he goes into the discussion, and what does he say? "Do you love me?" And of course, what do we all say? "Of course, Lord, I love you. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord." Right? And he says, "Great. Feed my sheep." That's a command. Feed my sheep. It's really easy to get all fired up and say, "Yeah, I'm with you, Lord, I'm with you." Now, do something about it. Take action. Words are cheap. Jesus is calling them out. He's calling all of us out. How many people always say, "Yeah, but I'm with Jesus in this." Well, then go preach the gospel. Go feed the children. Go clothe those that don't have any clothes. How many people get up and do that?
Should you turn and forsake him, he will gently call your name. Should you wander away from him, he will always take you back. Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord will stand as a shelter for all who will call on his name, sing the praise and the glory of God. As he swore to your fathers when the flood destroyed the land, he will never forsake you. He will swear to you again. Though the mountains may fall and the hills turn to dust, yet the love of the Lord will stand as a shelter for all who will call on his name, sing the praise and the glory of
The disciples approached him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it is already late. Dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves."
It's not on.
Jesus said to them, "There is no need for them to go away and give them some food yourselves." But they said to him, 5 loaves and 2 fish are all we have." Then he said, "Bring them here to me." And he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he said the blessing, broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowd. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the fragments left over, 12 wicker baskets full. Those who ate were about 5,000 men, not counting the women and children. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The 7 springs were. Some of those springs, as I told you, were hot springs that produced the hot water, and that's why all the fishermen in this area would come to this place and fish by the shores. Well, definitely back at that time, the water level was higher than what it is nowadays, and the water was much closer to where we are. So far, they have located 5 out of the 7 springs. Okay? And traditionally, this is the place where Jesus multiplied the 2 fish and the 5 loaves and fed the 5,000, not counting women and children. Nowadays, most scholars actually suggest that the number of people whom Jesus fed at that miracle is almost 20,000. If we want to count women and children and want to take in consideration the average family size back at that time. So we are talking about much more than 5,000 people. And when you have 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 people and you want to talk to them, where do you bring them to?
Theater.
A theater. A theater. Because we are talking about a huge amount of people. So we are standing at the foot of the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus did his famous Sermon on the Mount. Across the street, on the other side, is the Mount of Beatitudes. And the whole area from here all the way up to the top of the Mount of Beatitudes serves as a natural amphitheater, which is a perfect place for Jesus to gather all those thousands and thousands of people and teach them. Because if you go to, usually if you go to, as I told you, the natural amphitheaters or the Roman theaters, you always notice that the stage is lower than any of the seats because the natural thing for the sounds is to go up. If you come here, this area, on Yom Kippur, let us say, Yom Kippur is the holiest day for the Jews. It's the day that they do not do anything. No work, no driving, nothing. So if you come to this area over here on Yom Kippur, which is usually September, it's complete silence. And if you go up to the top of the Mount of Beatitudes, you could hear the smallest moves on the shores of the Sea of Galilee because of this natural amphitheater from here all the way up to the top of the Mount of Beatitudes. And that's why during the Byzantine period, the 4th century, they identified this place as the place where Jesus fed the 5,000 because it's the perfect place for him to gather all those crowds, all those people from here all the way up to the Mount of Beatitudes. When we go up to the top of the Mount of Beatitudes, you'll be able to notice that natural amphitheater. Now inside the church, the altar, you will see the top, only part of that huge rock, which is believed to be the place where Jesus placed the 2 fish and the 5 loaves, blessed them, and multiplied them. And just in front of that rock, you're going to see the famous mosaic that shows a basket with 2 fish on both sides and 4 loaves in the basket. We know that they were 5. Where's the 5th one?
We are.
Jesus, the Eucharist. Jesus himself is the 5th loaf. He's the Eucharist. So that is the famous mosaic. And then on both sides of the altar, you can see part of the original mosaic that presents the flora and fauna of this region. What do you see over here? This one over here, this is a typical 1st century wine press. Okay. At that time, they'll collect the grapes, put them over here, and mainly women back at that time would take off their shoes and step on the grapes to squeeze them or press them, and after that they'll collect the grape juice, put it in jars, and in a dark and cool place, like a cave, to ferment. Very easy process. This one over here, this is a typical 1st century olive press. The olives would be placed over here. Then this round stone would be tied by a wooden beam to a donkey or a mule, or in some cases a slave, that would go all the way around to press the olives. After that, the pressed olives are collected in bags or baskets, and the bags are placed on top of each other. Maximum 7 baskets. Why 7?
Perfect number?
The number of perfection. Yeah, number 7. So 7 baskets would be placed on top of each other. Because of the weight of those baskets, oil came out. And that was called the extra virgin oil. That was sent straight away in the 1st century to one place. Where was that? Jerusalem. To the temple in Jerusalem. The extra virgin oil was used only for 2 things. For the service of the temple and to anoint kings, nothing else. And after that, people will bring a stone or a weight, put it on top of those baskets. So more weight, more oil. That was called the virgin oil. That was used only for healing. For the 3rd time, they'll do the same with a bigger stone on top of that same stone. So again, more weight, more oil, and that was used for eating and cooking. But the oil that they collected without any weight on top of the baskets, that was the extra virgin oil that was sent straight away to the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so this is a typical 1st century olive press and wine press.
After this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way. Together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and 2 other of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We also will come with you." So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. When it was already dawn, Jesus was standing on the shore, but the disciples did not recognize that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" They answered him, "No." So he said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find something." So they cast it, and were not able to pull it in because of the number of fish. So the disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard this, that it was the Lord, he tucked in his garment, for he was lightly clad, and jumped into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, for they were not far from the shore, only about 100 yards, dragging a net filled with fish. When they climbed out on the shore, they saw a charcoal fire with fish and bread on it. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net ashore full of 153 large fish. Even though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they realized it was the Lord. Jesus came over and took the bread, gave it to them, and in a like manner the fish. This was now the third time Jesus was revealed to his disciples after being raised from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
When Jesus appeared to them and said to them. So that's why we call the church that you see over there, it's a small church, but inside the church there is a huge rock, which is called Mensa Christi. Mensa Christi means the table of Christ. And traditionally, it's the place where Jesus ate that breakfast with his disciples after his resurrection. They told you that in spite of the fact that Jesus tried over and over to tell his disciples that he must die in Jerusalem, when he was at Caesarea Philippi, he technically was telling them, like, this is the last journey I'm going to make with you to Jerusalem. Because I must die over there, the scriptures must be fulfilled, but this is not the end of the story. If you know who the Son of Man is, this is going to be the very beginning. But again, as I told you, that the disciples never got that point. And his death in Jerusalem was the end of the story. They decided to leave Jerusalem, they came back to Galilee, they went back to their normal jobs. And this is one of the reasons why Jesus had to appear to them over and over again. So when he appeared to them over here, and they told the 153 fish, what's the significance of this number?
It had to do with the known languages, the known cultures around the Mediterranean.
The nations.
The nations.
At the time of Jesus, 153 different species of fish existed in the lake. Nowadays, there's only 27. But back at that time, there was 153 different species of fish in the lake. And we know that from the very beginning, when Jesus called his disciples, he told them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Now, if you read the Gospel of Matthew in particular, from chapter 4 to chapter 14, it talks a lot about this area, about Galilee and the lake and the mountains and the fish. And you get the feeling or the understanding that for Jesus, every fish in the lake was one nation. The lake was the whole universe. Like when Jesus stood on top of the Mount of Beatitudes, overlooking the Sea of Galilee, and he said the Sermon on the Mount, his famous Sermon on the Mount. I mean, so many different interpretations were made in the Sermon on the Mount. But definitely, I mean, without any doubt, when Jesus said his Sermon on the Mount, he was describing to people how the kingdom of God looks like. And he was looking down in the lake, because for him, this is the kingdom of God. This is the new universe. This is the whole world. And every fish in the lake was one nation, one group of people for Jesus. So when the disciples caught all the 153 different species of fish in the lake, that was a message for them from Jesus that this is not the end. This is just the beginning. You are going to spread my message to all nations. This is the significance of the number 153. Now, after the meal, we know that when the disciples realized that this man talking to them on the shores, Peter came all the way. But we know that Peter considered himself to be like the closest disciple to Jesus and the most loyal disciple to Jesus, and he was. But anyways, he failed the test in Jerusalem, but still he considered himself to be the most loyal disciple to Jesus, to the Lord. So he came to the shores, the disciples followed, Jesus prepared the meal, he ate with the disciples. After the meal, what happened? Jesus made a very simple question to Peter. What was the question?
Do you love me?
My friend, how you doing? Enjoying your time. So you denied me 3 times in Jerusalem. Do you love me? And Peter was like, yes, Lord, you know I love you. For the second time, the same question, the same answer. For the third time, the same question, the same answer. When you ask someone 3 times in a row, the same question, it's so clear. You don't believe what he's telling you. But this is not what happened over here. If you read the Greek Gospels, 2 different words of love were used. The one that Jesus used when he made the question, which is agape, and the one that Peter used when he replied, which is phileo. Agape is an unconditional love. Phileo is a friendly love. That's like when Jesus made the question, Peter, do you love me in an unconditional way, or do you love me more than these? Peter couldn't use the word agape because he knew that he failed the test. Because at the Last Supper, he told Jesus, you know what? I'm going to go wherever you go. I'm going to follow you to death. And Jesus was like, no, take it easy. Calm down, my friend. You are going to deny me 3 times tonight. No, what are you saying? Are you crazy? All those disciples can deny you, not me. I'm your closest disciple. How come you tell me that I'm going to deny you? This was his reaction in Jerusalem. He did not accept the idea of denying his master because he considered himself to be the most loyal disciple to the Lord. And he denied him. And he realized very well that he failed the test. So when Jesus came over here and asked him, do you really love me, Peter? He couldn't use the word agape. Yes, I love you. But he used the word phileo. Yeah, I like you, Jesus. You are my best friend, I like you, you're a good person, and so on. For the second time, the same question using agape. The second time, the answer using phileo. Now for the third time, when Jesus asked him the third time, he used the word phileo. It's like, you know what, my friend? Do you even like me? And that was when Peter was so disappointed when Jesus asked him using that word. And after the third answer, Jesus told him, feed my sheep. He granted him to take the leadership of this new movement, of this new religion. He told him, you know what? I know that you didn't deny me because you hate me. I know that you love me. I'm not asking you because I doubt it. I know that you are my closest disciple. I know that you are the best person to carry my message and spread it to all nations, the 153 fish. But to do so, you have to love me in an unconditional way. You cannot just love me as a friend. So Jesus was trying to move Peter from the phileo, love, into the agape, love. And he granted him at the end to take the leadership of this new religion and spread it to all nations. That's why he told him, feed my sheep. He granted him to take the leadership of this new religion. He appeared to him over here to take away the burden that Peter feels on his shoulders. And he sat down. Well, this is very important because sitting down in rabbinical tradition is the position of having authority to teach. If you remember yesterday at Magdala when I told you that at every synagogue there was what we call the seat of Moses. where the teachers of the law would sit when they teach at the synagogue, when they teach from either the prophets, the four major Jewish prophets, or from the Torah. They must be seated, because sitting down is the position of teaching, or the position of having authority to teach. So, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that Jesus went up the mountain and he sat down, and his disciples came to him. Because when they saw him sitting down, they realized that he will start teaching them. And we know that Jesus was considered to be one of the so many Jewish rabbis, was traveling from one place to another place with a few disciples following him. Even his disciples considered him to be a rabbi, a teacher. And this is what they called him, Rabboni, or teacher, rabbi. And two things we can see over here that are related to the Beatitudes. The first thing, when Jesus said, a city built on a hilltop cannot be hidden. And that city is Safed, or Tzefat, which is north from here, uphill. On a clear day, you could see Safed, because that's like the highest town, the highest city in this area over here. And people could see it from everywhere in Galilee. So a city built on a hilltop cannot be hidden. When he said, you are the salt of the earth, what he was talking about? Where most of the salt was in this area? That is way far from here. Magdala, exactly.
Brought it.
Magdala is down there. Okay, so this is what he was talking about.
Well,
He was
they brought the
standing
salt
over here,
there.
looking at the fields of Magdala, where they had the piles of salt that was brought from the Dead Sea. You are the salt of the earth, not that salt. Okay? And from here, if you look that direction, you can see the valley that I told you about.
Yeah.
Okay? That serves as a wind gate for the wind coming from the Mediterranean through the Jezreel Valley all the way down to the Sea of Galilee. And that was the only connection between this area and the Jezreel Valley and Nazareth. So when Jesus came from Nazareth to here, he must have walked through that valley. And all those Jewish pilgrims going to Jerusalem, well, many of them, not all of them, had to come to this valley where all the vendors were to buy the pigeons that they carried with them all the way south to Jerusalem for the temple as sacrifices. Okay, we know this because that's where they discovered so many of the silver coins that were used as a temple tax to pay the temple tax in Jerusalem and to buy the sacrifice. So Jesus must have walked through this valley quite a few times. The mountain to its left is Mount Arbel, again, which was identified as the site of the Transfiguration, but it's related to Herod the Great. The final battle that took between Herod the Great and the Hasmoneans, which was the ruling dynasty before Herod the Great, took place on top of this mountain. The last Hasmonean fighters took the caves on the cliff as a last refuge. That's where they hid themselves. So what happened is that Herod came to the top of the mountain, he brought his soldiers, and he lowered them by baskets. They had iron hooks with them, where they pulled all those Hasmonean fighters and dropped them down in the valley. And they burned the rest. About 7,000 people got killed at that battle. And that was when Herod the Great put an end to the Hasmonean dynasty and started the Herodian dynasty. You know how Herod became a king? I'll tell you later. It's a long story. But just
Killed all the Heshbonites.
if you look across the valley of the pigeons over there, you'll see kind of a mountain with a flat top. Do you see it in the horizon?
Like a plateau.
That is what we call the Horns of Hattin. It's the place where on the 4th of July, 1187, the famous battle between the Crusaders and the troops of Saladin took place. That was when the Crusaders were defeated. They lost control over all their cities, and that was when the Muslims destroyed most of the Crusader churches in the country. There was the famous battle where the Crusaders lost. I mean, they maintained the presence over here until 1291 when they were completely defeated. But when we talk about the defeat of the Crusaders in the 12th century, that was the place where that famous battle took place on the 4th of July, 1187. We're going to talk maybe more about it tomorrow as we drive by that mountain. So we have this church that was built in an octagonal shape to commemorate the 8 Beatitudes of Jesus. It's a very simple church that you can visit. And after that, if you walk around down to the gardens, they have beautiful gardens overlooking the Sea of Galilee and the city of Tiberias, which is the view that Jesus must have seen when he was standing on top of the mountain. The other interesting thing over here is that area just behind the fence is where the natural amphitheater is. From the top of the mountain, from here all the way down to the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And as I told you, this was a perfect place for Jesus to gather all those thousands of people and talk to them. If you gather people over here, like thousands of them, and you want to talk to them, and you want them to hear you, you'll go down and stand by the shores, and you talk to them. All of them will be able to hear you. What did Jesus do over here? He did it the other way around. He gathered people at this natural amphitheater, and he came to the top of the mountain, and he talked to them. And yet all of them were able to hear him. He was challenging nature. So technically, this was another miracle of Jesus when he stood on top of the mountain and he talked to people who were sitting down below, and all of them were able to hear him. Right? Because the natural thing for the voices is to go up, not to go down. So this is the interesting thing about also the Beatitudes over here, because all those thousands of people were able to hear Jesus when he was on top of the mountain and not down below. Okay? So you can walk around from there. If you go there, you're going to be able to see that natural amphitheater. Is Abinu. The one for our Father in Aramaic is Abuna. So the same letters, but different pronunciation. Abinu and Abuna. So Abuna is the word that we still use nowadays when we address a priest. We still use the Aramaic word Abuna. So we'll address you from now on Abuna.
Abuna Fred.
as all was meant to be. You shall see me lifted up upon a tree. Behold, behold,
Sing to the mountains, sing to the sea, raise your voices,
soul from death.